the mechanisms behind something like that, even if it appears entirely superstitious on the surface, are often deeper than is revealed at first approximation. So, and I wanted to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, for a minute about rationality, because we've already agreed, I think, and definitely stop me if I'm wrong, that there has to be an intermediary mechanism between the world of facts and the world of values. And well, since we've talked, I've been reading a variety of commentaries on Immanuel Kant. Mostly these have been written by Roger Scruton, by the way. And this is actually the issue that Kant obsessed about for most of his philosophical life. And what he concluded was that empiricism can't be right and rationality can't be right as philosophical disciplines, because you need an intermediary structure, and that we have an inbuilt intermediary structure. And that structure is what mediates between the thing in itself, the world of facts, let's say, and the outputs, the values. And then in order to act, you have to select the target of action from among an infinite number, near infinite number, close enough, of possible mechanisms of action. And so what a biological organism does is take the facts and translate them into perception and action. And the only organisms that do that with one-to-one mapping are organisms that are composed of sensory motor cells, like sponges, marine sponges, which are composed of sensory motor cells. They don't have an intermediary nervous system. So what they do is they sit in the water and they make a sponge. They're so simple that if you grind a sponge through a sieve in salt water, it'll reorganize itself into the sponge. So that's quite cool. The sponge sits in the water.
Don't do that at home.
And what it does, and what it does is, there's waves on it, and so those are patterns. And then the sponge opens and closes pores on its surface in response to those patterns. So it maps the pattern of the waves right onto its behavior, with no intermediary of a nervous system. But it can only map waves, that's all it can do, and it can only open and close pores, that's it. So it does one-to-one fact-to-value mapping. Now what happens is that as the complexity of a biological organism increases, two things happen. The first thing that happens is that the sensory and motor cells differentiate. So now the organism has sensory cells and motor cells. So senses to detect and cells to detect and cells to act. Okay, so then it can detect more patterns because it's more sophisticated at the sensory perspective, and it can do more things because it has specialized motor systems. But then what happens is that as it gets even more complex, then it puts an intermediary structure of nervous tissue in there, and that structure increases in the number of layers of neurons. And what that means is that as that happens, and as the sensory cells become more specialized, and as the motor output cells become more specialized, many more patterns can be detected. Those are roughly equivalent to facts. And many more motor outputs can be manifested, but a tremendous number of calculations has to occur in that intermediary nervous tissue. And that's the structure that I'm talking about. That structure exists, and it translates the patterns into motor output. And it doesn't do it on a one-to-one basis, because there are more patterns, more facts, than there are motor outputs. So what has to happen is this tremendous plethora of facts that surrounds us has to be filtered to the point where you pick a single action, because you can't act otherwise. And so the mechanism that reduces the number of facts to the selected action is the mechanism that mediates between facts and values. And it's not simply in and of itself, it's a fact that exists, but it isn't a simple, that what it does isn't a simple fact. So now the question is, now you've got your sensory systems that are detecting the world of facts, and you have your motor output system, which is a very narrow channel, because you can only do one thing at a time. And that's one of the things about consciousness that's quite strange. It's a very, very narrow channel. So you have to take this unbelievably complex world, and you have to channel it into this very narrow channel. And you don't do that by being wrong about the world, but you do that by ignoring a lot of the world and by using representations that are no more complicated than they have to be in order to attain the task at hand. It's like you're using low-resolution representations of the world. They're not inaccurate, because a low-resolution representation of the world isn't inaccurate any more than a low-resolution photo is. But they're no higher resolution than they need to be in order for you to undertake the task at hand. And if you undertake the task at hand and that goes successfully, then what you've done, and this is basically the essence of American pragmatism, what you've done is validated the validity of your simplifications. So if the tool you have in hand is good, if the axe you have in hand is sharp enough to chop down the tree, then it's a good enough axe. And that's part of the way that we define truth pragmatically in the absence of infinite knowledge about everything. Okay, so now you build up this nervous system between the world of facts and the world of values, and it narrows the world of facts. And the question then is, how do you generate the mechanism that does that narrowing? First of all, I don't want to dispute the fact that there are stable qualia, pain and pleasure, for example, and also that there are fundamental motivational systems that structure our perception. So as the nervous system increases in complexity, these underlying nervous system subsections that produce these rather stable qualia evolve. Hunger, thirst, defensive aggression, sexuality, all these subsystems that label experience with certain somewhat inviolable labels. I understand that happens. But the point that I'm trying to make here is, I think, to try to increase the, what would you call, the breadth of the conversation about how facts get translated into values. Because it seems to me the other thing that your account doesn't take proper, and this is what surprised me so much about your thinking when I first encountered it. See, I think the manner in which facts are translated into values is something that actually evolved. And it evolved over 3.5 billion years, the 3.5 billion years of life. And it built the nervous system from the bottom up. And it built this reducing mechanism that takes the infinite number of facts and translates them into a single value per action. And it does that in layers. And so there is a relationship between the world of facts and the world of values. And there has to be, but it isn't derivable one-to-one in the confines of your single existence through pure rationality. It's way more complicated than that.